The morning I stopped breathing wasn't because I was sick. It was because of a photo. It was my daughter's wedding. I found out on Facebook. There she was, standing in her white dress, her husband's family beside her, their smiles wide enough to erase me completely. No call, no letter, not even a text that said, "Mom, I'm getting married." I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold, until my hands forgot how to move. That picture wasn't just a celebration. It was a funeral. The day she buried me without flowers or goodbye. My name is Elaine Porter, 67 years old, a mother who gave her life for a daughter who deleted her with a single post. And this is one of those family drama stories that don't begin with a fight. They begin with silence. After that morning, I couldn't touch my phone for days. Every time the screen lit up, I saw her face, beaming, perfect, surrounded by people who took my place, people who clapped for her, toasted her, called her sweetheart. No one called me Mom. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the chair where she used to do her homework, the one with pencil scratches from when she was 10. It was still there, still waiting, just like me. When you spend decades building a life for someone, you start to believe they'll never walk away from it. I was wrong. She didn't walk. She ran and slammed the door so hard I could still feel the wind it left behind. For weeks, the neighbors dropped by, pretending they didn't know. They'd say things like, "I saw the pictures. She looked so beautiful." And I'd nod, smile, pour coffee with trembling hands. Then I'd close the door and fall apart in silence. The nights were the worst. The house made new sounds, walls breathing, floorboards groaning, the refrigerator humming like an old memory refusing to die. I'd sit in the dark, wondering when I became invisible. Did I smother her with love? Did I hold on too tight? Or did she simply forget who held her first? One evening, I pulled out her baby blanket, the yellow one I knitted while waiting for her to be born. The fabric was soft, frayed at the corners. I pressed it to my face and whispered, "You used to need me for everything." The whisper came back empty. I started talking to the walls, to her photos, to the ghost of the little girl who once ran home from school yelling, "Mama, I got an A." Now she was someone's wife, someone's daughter-in-law, someone who no longer needed me. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from death. It comes from being erased by the living, and it burns slower, deeper. I remember one night, scrolling through her page again, torturing myself. There were hundreds of comments. "So happy for you both. You deserve all the joy." I kept scrolling, hoping maybe she'd mention me somewhere. But she didn't. Not once. That's when it hit me. She didn't forget me. She removed me. Like deleting an old photo that doesn't fit the new frame. I couldn't sleep that night. I made tea, stared out the window, and realized love had turned into a wound. I kept reopening myself. Every scroll was a cut. Every memory was salt. Every silence was a reminder that I had built her wings, and she'd used them to fly away from me. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. Not from her, from her lawyer. Short, cold, efficient. She wanted to sell the house. "Since it's under both names," it said, "we suggest proceeding with immediate sale and equal division." Equal division. Funny how the law can slice love into math. I sat there for hours, staring at those two words. Equal division. As if you can divide 30 years of sleepless nights, of birthday cakes, of scraped knees and lullabies. As if motherhood has a price tag. That night, I lit a candle for myself. Not for her, for me, for the woman who gave everything and still ended up alone at the table, I realized something. You can't beg someone to value what they've already priced at zero. If you've ever been replaced by the very person you raised, you'll understand this kind of quiet, the kind that hums in your bones, that whispers, "Don't cry, she's not coming back." And still, you cry anyway. Because the truth is, even when love hurts you, you still love. I stopped cooking her favorite meals, stopped checking my phone, stopped waiting for her to knock. But every time the wind rattled the window, I'd turn my head, just in case it was her. That's how mothers are built. We keep the door open, even when we've been locked out. Weeks turned into months. I started cleaning the attic, boxing up her old things. I found her prom dress, her yearbook, the birthday card that said, "Best mom in the world." I laughed. Then I cried so hard, I couldn't breathe. I remembered the day she graduated college. How proud I was, clapping until my hands stung. Back then, I thought, we made it. Now I realized, I made it for her, not with her. There's a difference. And it hurts to learn it too late. That night, I looked at her picture one last time. The same photo I saw on Facebook, the one that broke me. But this time, I didn't cry. I whispered, "Be happy," and closed the laptop. Then, I turned off my phone. It felt like pulling the plug on my own heartbeat. But for the first time in months, the silence felt mine. If you're still here listening, and if you've ever had to let go of someone who walked away from you first, hit the or type 1 in the comments. Because sometimes, the only way to stay strong is to stand in your own quiet and still love anyway. After I turned off the phone that night, I thought silence would save me. But silence is a strange thing. It doesn't heal right away. It echoes, and every echo carries the shape of the person who left. Weeks passed, but every morning felt the same. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, pretending the world hadn't changed. The mailman still waved, the sun still rose, the neighbor's dog still barked, but inside my chest, everything was upside down. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe it was her, but when I opened the door, it was a young woman in a gray suit. She handed me an envelope and smiled the way people do when they know something you don't. It was another letter from the lawyer. This time, it wasn't about selling the house. It was about possession. Apparently, my daughter and her husband had already sold their share of the property to someone else. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. My own house, where I raised her, where her father's ashes rested, was no longer fully mine. She didn't just walk away from me. She sold the ground I stood on. I laughed, not out of humor, but out of disbelief. You reach a point where pain bends so far it starts sounding like laughter. I whispered to myself, she took everything I gave her, and now she's taking what's left. That night, I went room to room, touching the walls. Every scratch, every dent, every memory suddenly felt temporary. I stood in her old room, still painted pale blue. The posters on the wall had faded. The curtains smelled like dust and summer. I whispered, "You can take the walls, but you can't take the years." And for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry. I was hollow. Hollow is worse than angry. At least anger keeps you warm. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not neighbors. I just started packing boxes. Clothes, books, old photos. I found her graduation cap and almost folded it gently into the box. But I couldn't. It felt like wrapping up my own heart. I placed it on the table instead, staring at it, through tears I didn't bother to wipe. That's when the phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Hi, Mom, it's me." For a second, I couldn't breathe. I read it again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into an apology. Then came the next line. I know you're upset, but it's complicated. We just needed the money for a down payment. Down payment, that's what I became. Collateral. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would have reached her. The next day, her photo showed up again. This time, tagged in another post. New house, white porch, perfect smile. I remember whispering to myself, you built your dream on the ruins of mine. That evening, I went out to the backyard. The garden was still there, wild, overgrown, stubbornly alive. Her father used to call it the place where things refused to die. He was right. I sat on the old wooden bench and looked up at the sky. It was bruised with sunset, that deep purple before the dark settles in. I said out loud, God, if this is what love looks like, maybe I've been loving wrong my whole life. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves like an answer I couldn't understand. I closed my eyes and remembered the day her father died, how she held my hand and said, don't cry, Mom. I'll always be your little girl. And I had believed her. How foolish we become when we mistake promises for permanence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by half-packed boxes, the letter still open beside me. Something inside me broke, and then rebuilt itself differently. If she could erase me, then maybe I could erase the version of me that kept waiting to be remembered. So I made a decision, a quiet, trembling decision. I would sell the house first, not out of revenge, but because I couldn't breathe inside it anymore. Every wall echoed her name. Every corner whispered. She left. When the real estate agent came 2 days later, I didn't flinch. He asked, are you sure you want to do this? I said, I'm sure. Sometimes peace looks like an empty room. As I signed the papers, I felt something shift in my chest. Not freedom yet, but the beginning of it. If you've ever had to let go of something you built for someone else, you'll understand this part. It's not the leaving that hurts. It's realizing they never looked back. So if you're watching this on your phone right now, tap like. Not for me, but for every parent who gave too much and stayed too quiet. And if you're watching on a big screen at home, write 1 in the comments. So I know this story found someone who understands what silence really costs. Because family drama stories like this one aren't about villains and victims. They're about people who love too hard and lose themselves doing it. I stopped checking Facebook after that day. I couldn't bear to see more pictures of her smiling like I never existed. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. Or maybe cruelty. 2 weeks later, a letter came in the mail. Not from her, of course. From the bank. Her name was still on the deed of my house. The one I built with my late husband. The one she grew up in. That's when the thought first crossed my mind. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing my fingers over the wood he carved decades ago, and said out loud, maybe it's time to let go. Letting go. 2 words that sound peaceful until you try to do it. The next morning, I called the agent, the same man who'd helped me buy this place 40 years ago. He sounded surprised. Are you sure, Mrs. Porter? That house, it's your life. I swallowed hard. It was, I said. Now it's just a reminder. He paused, then said softly, I'll handle it. I didn't pack quickly. Every object had a story. Every wall had laughter painted into it. I found the pencil marks on the doorframe where I used to measure her height every birthday. The one from her 16th, the day she said she'd never leave me. I almost tore that piece of the wall out to keep it. But I didn't, because I knew if I kept one piece, I'd keep them all, and I'd never move forward. By the time the new owners came, I had stopped crying. My tears had dried into something heavier, a quiet numbness that filled the house even after it was empty. The woman who bought it was young, about my daughter's age, holding a baby on her hip. She said, "It's beautiful. Feels like a home." I smiled. It was. As I handed her the keys, I felt something shift inside me. A door closing, but maybe another opening somewhere else. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch of the small apartment I'd rented near the bus station. The air was colder there, lonelier too. I could hear the train whistles in the distance. Sharp, distant reminders of all the people leaving, all the people arriving, all the people who never looked back. And for the first time, I understood why my daughter didn't call. Because I had raised her to be strong, but not to be grateful, to be ambitious, but not to remember. I gave her everything, except the wisdom to see what mattered most. The truth hit hard, not like a slap, but like a quiet realization that's been waiting in the corner all along. Maybe she didn't erase me out of hate. Maybe she just grew up in a world that worships new beginnings and forgets the hands that built them. Still, knowing that didn't make the pain smaller. It just made it more complicated. The next day, I opened my phone again. After weeks of silence, the first thing that popped up was her wedding photo, shared by someone else, of course. Thousands of likes, hearts, comments. Beautiful bride. Perfect day. Not a single word about who raised that bride. I didn't comment. I didn't message. I just stared. My hand shook, not from anger, but from something deeper. The weight of everything I'd done, out of love, that no one would ever see. And in that quiet space, I decided something. If she could move on, so could I. So I sold the last thing that tied me to her. The house, the walls, the garden, the memories. I didn't tell anyone. Not her, not the neighbors, not the church ladies who'd whisper, "Poor Elaine, her daughter left her." No, this wasn't a tragedy anymore. This was a statement. When the deal was done, I stood in the empty yard one last time. The wind moved through the trees like a voice. Maybe my husband's, maybe my own. I looked up at the window of my daughter's old room, now just glass and light, and whispered, "Goodbye, baby." Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of acceptance, because some goodbyes aren't about leaving someone behind. They're about finally returning to yourself. That night, I felt something strange. Not peace, exactly. More like quiet power. Like I had finally stopped waiting for her to come home and started walking my own path again. And maybe, just maybe, life had been waiting for me to do that all along. The house sold faster than I expected. By the end of the month, the keys were gone, the rooms empty, and the garden, my stubborn little piece of peace, belonged to someone else. I thought it would hurt more, but strangely, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I packed, just for myself. No daughter's clothes, no baby photos, no boxes labeled for when she comes back. Only me, a suitcase, and what was left of my heartbeat. I rented a small cabin by a lake 2 towns over. Quiet place. No internet, no Facebook reminders, no neighbors who whispered. Just wind, water, and time. I started walking every morning, down the same trail, until my legs ached. At first, I walked to escape the noise in my head, but eventually, the silence stopped feeling like punishment. It started feeling like peace. One morning, I stopped at a cafe near the lake. The owner, a woman around my age, smiled and said, "You have the face of someone who used to love too loudly." I laughed softly. "Used to." She nodded. "We all do, until the world teaches us to whisper." That line stayed with me all day. Maybe that's what motherhood was. Loving so loudly that when the echo fades, it leaves you hollow. 3 months passed before I heard from her again. Another message. shorter this time. Mom, are you okay? I heard you sold the house. I stared at the screen. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. Just a quiet curiosity, like reading about someone else's life. I typed back one line. I'm fine. Hope you are too. No guilt, no explanation. Just boundaries wrapped in politeness. But life, it seems, doesn't like being ignored. Because a week later, karma came knocking. And it came loud. I was sipping tea when the phone rang again. It was a mutual friend, Linda, her voice trembling. Elaine, did you hear? Hear what? Her husband. He's gone. Took their savings. Left her with debt and a mortgage she can't pay. For a long moment, I said nothing. Not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. There's a strange stillness that comes when the universe balances its books. I looked out over the lake, watching the ripples spread across the surface. I whispered, so this is how it feels when the storm moves to someone else's sky. I didn't smile, but I also didn't ache. A few days later, I saw her name again. This time, not in wedding photos, but in a charity post. Help a young couple recover after financial loss. It said. There she was. The same white dress, now turned gray by time. Eyes empty. I read the comments. Pity, sympathy, donations. And still, she hadn't reached out to me directly. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about how she'd laughed in that wedding photo. How I had cried for weeks while she toasted champagne. Now, she was learning what silence feels like, what it means to knock and not be answered. I won't lie, it felt good, not out of cruelty, but out of justice, like breathing clean air after years of choking on smoke. 2 weeks later, I went to the grocery store, and there she was, my daughter. She stood in front of the produce aisle, thinner than I remembered, eyes hollowed by something deeper than exhaustion. When she saw me, she froze. I could see the words forming on her lips, but nothing came out. She just whispered, "Mom?" It was strange. After all the years, all the pain, I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Me screaming, her begging, a scene worthy of family drama stories. But when it finally happened, I didn't say anything dramatic. I just looked at her and said, "You look tired." Her eyes filled instantly. She took a small step closer, whispering, "I didn't know where else to go." There it was, the sentence I'd waited years to hear. But the sound of it didn't bring satisfaction. It brought stillness. Because in that moment, I realized something. Karma doesn't need an audience. It doesn't shout. It whispers through time until everyone hears what they once refused to listen to. She asked if I had a minute to talk. I nodded. We sat outside the store on a metal bench. She told me everything. The husband's betrayal, the eviction notice, the nights she slept on a friend's couch. And then she said, "I didn't understand how much I hurt you until I felt it myself." I looked at her hands, trembling the same way mine used to. I thought of every tear I'd cried, every sleepless night wondering where I went wrong. And I realized maybe I hadn't gone wrong at all. Maybe she just needed to meet her own reflection in life's mirror. When she finished, she whispered, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to see you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a slow breath and said, "Life has a way of returning lessons we ignore." Her face crumbled, tears spilling freely. I didn't hug her. Not yet. But I didn't walk away either. Sometimes, the most powerful forgiveness is silence that doesn't push away. As she left, she turned back once more, eyes searching mine. I nodded gently, and that was enough. That night, I walked by the lake again. The moonlight shimmered on the water like scattered glass. I whispered, "Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it just looks like peace." And for the first time in a long time, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from finally stopping the war inside. A few days after seeing her at the grocery store, she called again. This time, I answered. Her voice was small, like the little girl who used to hide behind me during thunderstorms. She said, "Mom, I don't want money. I just want to come home for a while." Home. That word landed like a stone, dropped into still water. I looked around my cabin, the wooden walls, the small kitchen, the single bed. It wasn't the house she grew up in, but maybe it was the first place that truly belonged to me. I told her, "You can come, but not to stay. Just to breathe." She didn't argue. She just whispered, "Thank you," and hung up. When she arrived, 2 days later, she looked smaller, as if life had pressed her down from every angle. Her eyes darted around, searching for judgment, but there was none left to give. I made soup, the same recipe her grandmother used to make, the one with too much garlic and not enough salt. She smiled faintly when she tasted it. For a few moments, we ate without words, just two women trying to remember how to be family again. After dinner, she said, "I kept thinking if I said sorry, it would fix everything. But I don't even know what sorry means anymore." I set my spoon down, watching her tremble. "You'll learn," I said quietly. "Sorry isn't a word. It's a way of living." She cried then, not the kind of crying that demands pity, but the kind that admits truth. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat by the window and listened to the lake whisper. For the first time, I felt a strange calm. Not joy, not revenge, just balance. In every family drama story, there comes a moment when the pain circles back to where it started. But if you've grown enough, it doesn't break you again. It sets you free. That night, I understood that life had already done what I couldn't. It had humbled her, and somehow it had softened me. The next morning, I found her sitting outside, staring at the water. Her eyes were red, her hands clasped. She said, "I thought you'd hate me forever." I shook my head. I did, but hate is heavy. I had to put it down. She nodded slowly. "You were right about him, about everything." I smiled faintly. I wasn't right. I was just tired of being wrong. We both laughed, awkwardly, painfully, but it was laughter all the same. Then she said something that almost broke me again. "When you sold the house, I thought you were punishing me. But now I see. You were letting go before I did." That was it, the moment I'd waited years for. Not her apology, but her understanding. As she packed to leave later that day, she hesitated by the door. "Can I call you again?" she asked. I nodded. "When you want to talk, not when you need something." She smiled, a real smile, tired but true. When she left, I stood by the window, watching her car disappear down the gravel road. The sound faded, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt peaceful. Sometimes, karma isn't a storm that destroys. It's the quiet day that follows it. It's the moment you realize the story wrote itself exactly as it needed to. That evening, I brewed another cup of tea and stepped outside. The sunset painted the lake gold, like forgiveness made visible. I whispered, "Maybe this is what justice looks like, when life evens the scales without me lifting a finger." The wind stirred the trees, soft and steady, as if agreeing. I thought of all the grandma stories I'd heard growing up, women who lost everything but their pride, who turned their pain into wisdom. Now, I understood them. I had become one of them. And maybe, just maybe, my own story would remind someone else that peace doesn't arrive when others pay. It arrives when you stop counting. If you're still here listening, remember this. You don't always need revenge to win. Sometimes your calm is the loudest victory. If that resonates with you, tap like or write why in the comments. Because these family drama stories we share aren't just about hurt. They're about healing in slow motion, one quiet heartbeat at a time. After she left, the house felt too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that hurts, but the kind that lingers, heavy and full, like the air before rain. I sat by the window long after her car disappeared, watching the dust settle on the road. The tea on the table had gone cold, untouched. Outside, the lake was still. Even the birds seemed to pause, as if the whole world was waiting for me to exhale. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for her. I was waiting for myself. I walked through the cabin, touching the corners, the walls, the space she had just filled, and left again. Her voice still echoed faintly, softer than memory, but warmer than pain. And I realized something. Sometimes closure doesn't come from words. It comes from knowing you could speak and choosing silence instead. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat with my thoughts, letting them walk around like guests who'd stayed too long. Every sound felt like a confession. The creak of the chair, the hum of the fridge, even the faint ticking of the clock. They were all saying the same thing. It's over now. I used to think forgiveness was about saying the right words at the right time. Now I knew it was about sitting with the silence after everything has been said and realizing you don't need to fix what already broke. I went outside, barefoot, the ground cool beneath my feet. The moonlight spilled across the lake like a path made of glass. I whispered, "She's hurting now. Maybe that's enough." Then I stopped, because deep down, I knew that wasn't peace. It was pity, disguised as comfort. The truth is, I wasn't free yet. I had let her go on the outside. But inside, she still lived in every thought. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't meant to move on. Maybe I was meant to grow through. The night air felt heavy with questions. What would I do without the pain that shaped me? Who was I, if not the mother waiting by the door? I looked up at the stars, tiny, stubborn, distant, and whispered, "I've spent my whole life forgiving others, but how do I forgive myself?" The next morning, I made coffee the way I always did, slow and steady. The light fell through the window, soft and golden, painting the dust in midair. I smiled, faintly, realizing the dust had always been there. I just never stopped moving long enough to see it. That's what healing is. Not a fire, not a miracle. Just noticing what's always been waiting to be noticed. I sat on the porch, wrapped in my old blanket, and for the first time, I didn't replay the past. I didn't argue with ghosts or rewrite old sentences. I just breathed. Somewhere in that breath, something shifted. The pain didn't leave, but it changed shape. It became quieter, smaller, less sharp, almost gentle. By noon, I felt like I'd aged and softened at the same time, like the years had finally caught up to me in the best way. The part of me that wanted revenge had turned into something else. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. And maybe that's what comes after all family drama stories. Not a happy ending, not even a fair one, just the beginning of wisdom. I stayed outside until the sun started to fade. The wind picked up, brushing the trees, whispering something I couldn't quite name. It felt familiar, comforting, like the voice of an old friend, reminding me that nothing truly ends. It just changes form. I whispered to the lake, maybe it's time to let life speak again. And the water shimmered back, as if it agreed. The air grew still, but I didn't feel alone. For the first time since everything happened, I sensed something, or someone, near. A calm presence, not loud, not demanding, just there, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for wisdom to arrive. And that's when I knew. The next chapter wasn't about her anymore. It was about the lesson hidden beneath everything I'd lost. The wind shifted again, warm against my face, and deep down, I felt it. Something was coming, something that didn't need an explanation, only understanding. The air that evening felt softer somehow, like it had been listening to my thoughts. I sat outside, the lake calm and silver under the moonlight, thinking about everything that had happened. My daughter, the house, the betrayal, and the strange peace that followed. But even peace can feel lonely when you don't know what to do with it. I remember whispering, if this is forgiveness, why does it still hurt? And then, behind me, a voice said quietly, because forgiveness isn't the end of pain. It's the beginning of understanding it. I turned around. There he was, a tall man in a simple gray coat, standing by the fence like he'd been there forever. Orion Sage. He didn't smile right away, but his presence was calm, like he'd brought the silence with him, not to quiet me, but to help me hear myself. I said, "You again?" He nodded, stepping closer. Always, when the heart is ready to listen. We sat on the porch without speaking for a while. The crickets filled the silence with their rhythm. Finally, I said, I thought I was done hurting. I let her go. I sold the house. I forgave her. Why does it still ache? He picked up a small pebble and rolled it between his fingers. You've cleared the surface, he said, but the roots are still there. The roots? He nodded. Every thought, every word, every action plants a seed. What you're feeling now isn't punishment. It's the harvest. I frowned. So, this pain is my fault. He shook his head slowly. Not fault. Responsibility. You can't control what others plant, but you can decide which seeds you water. I looked out at the garden. The weeds had grown wild since my daughter left. He followed my gaze. That's the garden of your mind, too, he said softly. You pulled out the anger, but you left the guilt, and guilt grows faster than weeds. His words sank in like stones into still water. I whispered, then how do I stop watering it? He smiled faintly. By planting something else. He stood up and walked to the garden, motioning for me to follow. We stopped in front of a small patch of dirt where nothing had grown in years. He knelt down, dug his hands into the soil, and said, Do you see how dry it is? This is what happens when we protect the ground from pain. No rain can reach it. I watched him, unsure what to say. He picked up a handful of soil and let it fall between his fingers. You can't heal in the same soil where resentment grows. You have to turn it over, face what's underneath. Then he looked at me and said, Tell me, what seed did you plant the day she betrayed you? I thought for a moment. Hurt, I said. Anger, maybe even pride. He nodded. And what have you been feeding those seeds with since then? Silence. He smiled gently. Every time you replay the betrayal, every time you say her name with pain, you're watering the same garden. I sat down beside him, the earth cool against my palms. So, what do I plant now? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small paper packet from his pocket and handed it to me. Inside were 3 tiny sunflower seeds. Gratitude, he said. Plant one for what you had, one for what you lost, and one for what you learned. I turned the seeds over in my palm. Gratitude for what I lost? He nodded. Pain is the proof that love existed. The problem isn't that it hurts. It's that you forget it came from love in the first place. I stared at the seeds for a long moment before pressing one into the soil. The ground felt cold, rough, real. I whispered, "Thank you for what you gave me." He smiled. Now the second. I pressed another into the dirt. "Thank you for what you took away." The last one felt heavier in my hand. "And this?" He looked at me, eyes soft but deep. "That one's for what you're about to become." I planted it carefully, covering it with my palm. When I looked up, Orion Sage was watching me, not with pride, but with something like relief. He said, "Gratitude doesn't change the past. It changes your relationship with it." We sat there for a while, side by side, as the stars shimmered overhead. He broke the silence first. "Do you know why the world keeps repeating lessons?" I shook my head. "Because most people only listen to pain. They don't learn from it. The universe keeps teaching until you stop reacting and start reflecting." His words made something in me shift, almost painfully. I said, "So this, everything, was supposed to happen?" He looked at me, smiling faintly. "Life doesn't happen to you. It happens through you. Every choice, every thought is a mirror, showing you what you're growing inside." The wind rustled the trees, scattering leaves across the dirt. He pointed toward them. "See that? Even the dead things return to the soil. Nothing is wasted if you let it transform." I watched the leaves settle, the soft sound like whispers from another time. I felt tears rise, not sharp, but warm, the kind that heal instead of burn. He said quietly, "You've carried pain like a torch, trying to light your way. But maybe now you can let the sun rise instead." Something broke open inside me then. Not from sadness, but release. For years, I'd been trying to rewrite the story, to make her choices make sense. But maybe the only thing that ever needed rewriting was my own heart. I whispered, "I think I finally understand." Orion Sage smiled. "Good. Then we can talk about what comes next." Orion Sage stayed long after the stars had scattered across the lake. We didn't speak for a while. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was alive, like the pause between heartbeats. Then he said quietly, "You've learned how to plant gratitude. Now you need to understand why the same pain kept coming back." I looked at him. "Because I kept loving the wrong people?" He smiled gently. "No, because you kept loving the right people in the wrong way." Those words landed like warm rain. He continued, "You loved your daughter so fiercely that you mistook control for care. You tried to protect her from the world, and in doing so, you stopped her from facing her own storms. And when she left, you thought she took your worth with her." I stayed silent, letting his words settle. He wasn't judging me. He was unraveling me, thread by thread. He said, "We plant our fears in the people we love most. That's how pain grows, through good intentions that never learned how to breathe." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small mirror. "Look," he said, holding it up. I saw my own face in the reflection. Older, tired, but somehow softer now. He asked, "What do you see?" I hesitated. "A woman who gave too much." He shook his head. "No, look again." I looked longer this time. The lines on my face looked like rivers, carved by years of love, loss, laughter. He said, "That's not a woman who gave too much. That's a woman who's still standing after giving everything. The world doesn't owe her anything, but she owes herself peace." I felt my chest tighten. He placed the mirror on my palm. When you blame others, you lose your power. When you see the reflection, you begin to take it back. I whispered, but what if I fail again? What if I can't change what I've planted? Orion Sage smiled. Then you plant again. He pointed at the garden. Do you think every seed becomes a flower? Some break, some never sprout. But the gardener doesn't stop planting, because one morning, without warning, something blooms. He leaned forward. You've been living like the garden was dead, but it wasn't. It was resting, waiting for you to notice. I felt tears rising. So all this pain, all this time, it had a purpose. He nodded. Pain isn't the punishment. It's the fertilizer. Without it, your soul stays shallow. We sat there as the wind shifted. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. And for a moment, everything felt connected. The water, the earth, the air, the silence. He said, you see, in these family drama stories, people think the villain is the one who leaves, but often it's the one who refuses to let go. I flinched slightly. So I was the villain. He smiled softly. No, you were human, but every story needs someone brave enough to turn the page. I laughed through my tears. You really know how to make it hurt beautifully. He chuckled. Truth always does, but after it hurts, it heals. Then his voice grew softer, lower. Let me tell you something, Mrs. Carter. There are 3 kinds of seeds people plant in life. He raised his fingers one by one. The first are seeds of reaction, born from fear, pride, or pain. They grow fast, but die faster. That's the fight you kept having with your daughter. The second are seeds of survival, actions you take just to keep going. They don't bloom, but they keep you alive. Like all those years you worked, forgave, and carried on. And the last are seeds of awareness, choices you make once you stop blaming the soil. He smiled. That's what you're doing now. His words felt like sunlight after a long storm. For years, I had been surviving. Now, maybe, I was finally awakening. I asked, and what happens when those seeds grow? He leaned back, looking at the horizon. When awareness takes root, everything changes. You don't need others to change for you. The world starts reflecting your peace instead of your pain. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink deep. I thought about all the grandma stories I used to read as a child. Tales of women who lost everything, but found themselves in the process. Maybe those weren't just stories. Maybe they were maps. I whispered, how do I make sure I don't plant fear again? Orion Sage picked up a handful of soil and let it fall between his fingers. By noticing what you feel before you act, awareness is the pause between the impulse and the outcome. He smiled. You already took the hardest step. You stopped running. We sat quietly for a while. Then he said something I'll never forget. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, Mrs. Carter. It erases the distance between your heart and your peace. He looked toward the lake. When your daughter hurt you, it wasn't personal. It was just her pain trying to find a place to land. But you don't have to keep being her landing place. That line struck me so deeply that I couldn't speak. He continued, you can still love her, but from where you've grown, not from where you broke. I nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. Finally, he stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. Plant something new each morning, he said. Even if it's small, a thought, a smile, a moment of gratitude. That's how you change your life quietly, seed by seed. I looked up at him. And when will I know it's working? He smiled. When peace feels more familiar than pain. Then, as he turned to leave, he paused by the fence. Remember this, he said. Your garden doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. It just needs to be tended with love. And with that, he walked into the twilight, his silhouette fading into the soft orange glow of the horizon. I sat there, holding the mirror in one hand and the soil in the other, realizing for the first time that I wasn't broken. I was blooming. After Orion Sage left, the world felt different, not quieter, alive, like the air itself was breathing with me. I stayed on the porch long after he was gone, holding that small mirror he'd given me. My reflection stared back, same face, same wrinkles, but the eyes were new. There was no bitterness in them anymore, no waiting, no war, just peace. For so long, I had measured my worth by what I'd given others, how much love, how much forgiveness, how much pain I could survive. But that night, I realized something Orion Sage had been teaching me all along. You can't harvest peace from seeds of guilt. You can only grow what you're willing to nurture. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The lake was still wrapped in fog, the world half asleep. I brewed my coffee and went outside barefoot again. The soil was cool under my feet. I knelt by the little patch where we'd planted the 3 sunflower seeds. Nothing had sprouted yet. But I smiled anyway, because for the first time in years, I wasn't watching for results. I was watching for life. I whispered to the ground, "Thank you for teaching me patience. Thank you for teaching me peace." And I swear, the wind moved just slightly, like it heard me. Later that day, the phone rang. It was my daughter. Her voice trembled. "Mom, I don't know what to say." I didn't rush to fill the silence this time. I just let her speak. Finally, she said, "I keep thinking about everything you told me. About love, about fear. I want to come visit." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Come if you mean it," I said softly. "Not to fix the past, but to build the future." She whispered, "I mean it, Mom." When we hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat there, smiling at the sound of her voice echoing in the quiet room. Because healing isn't when everything is perfect again. It's when your heart opens without needing proof that it's safe. Weeks later, the first sunflower sprouted. Tiny, fragile, and determined. I laughed out loud, the sound startling even me. I thought of Orion Sage's words. Plant something new each morning. And I did, not just in the garden, but in my thoughts, my words, my choices. Gratitude became my rhythm. Every day, I wrote 3 things. Thank you for what stayed. Thank you for what left. Thank you for what's still growing. And in doing that, I realized something simple but profound. I didn't lose my daughter. I was just waiting for her to come home to herself. Months passed. My daughter visited often now. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. But there was no more tension in the silence, only understanding. One evening, as we sat by the lake, she said, "I used to think you were stronger than me, but now I see. You just learned to love yourself first." I smiled. "And you're learning too." She nodded. "I think I finally am." The sun dipped below the water, the light spilling across our faces. In that golden hour, everything made sense. The loss, the anger, the lessons, even the silence. It all led here. I don't know if Orion Sage will ever return in person, but I feel him often, in the rustle of the wind, in the shimmer of the lake, in the calm between one thought and the next. He once said, "Peace doesn't shout, it waits for you to notice it." And now, I do. Maybe that's why people tell these family drama stories. Not to relive the pain, but to remind others that the garden always grows back, as long as you're brave enough to plant again. So, if you're listening right now, wherever you are, remember this: you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to grow from it. If this story touched your heart, tap like and share it with someone who's still healing. And write in the comments, "I'm planting peace," because the world needs more stories like these. Grandma stories that teach us to forgive, to begin again, and to love deeper the second time. And when you're ready for another lesson from Orion Sage, you know where to find me.